When it comes to business, your story is one of the untapped assets in your business. People struggle to find the right story to tell. She's gone on to be a consultant for Nike. She's gone on to do events across the country. Everyone has a story to tell. Redefine what the culture experience, what the coffee culture experience is around the world. A lot of us don't want to go back to those moments, especially when our stories might be negative or traumatizing, that we don't want to go back to relive those experiences. A story is a universal language. Regardless of your culture, one specific area is your zone of genius, is your superpower zone, is a territory that no one else in the world can compete with you.
Good morning, everyone. This morning we have a special guest. He's like the big bro in the entrepreneurial spectrum, and he will be sharing with us a whole lot of wisdom and values that we could use to improve ourselves in our life and our business. He is also the author of Waterless Voices. You guys should go check it out. Oh, what's up? Yeah, go check it out. It's a very insightful book, and we can't wait to hear everything that you have to share for us. And he also has a short film out there that I'd like you guys to go check out as well. But we will really deep dive into that and see where this goes. Good morning, Gbenga Ogunjimi. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. Good morning, Dapo. Thank you for having me on your show.
Thank you for agreeing to be a guest on my podcast as well. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you became the Gbenga Ogunjimi that you are today.
Well, I run a company called Go Global, based in Washington, D.C. Go Global is a leadership consulting firm. We specialize in the business of storytelling. And as you rightly said, I'm also an author of a book called Waterless Voice, The Power of Telling Your Story and Defining Your Identity. And I'm the executive producer of a business documentary called Good to Great Stories, a small business documentary. My journey into business storytelling started several years ago when I had a defining moment. I was on campus. I was seeking a career pathway, and shortly after graduation, I had a career conundrum. I was kind of at a crossroads if I should go for profit or if I should go nonprofit. And because of that conflict, I found a career coach and I told her my story. And she said to me, Gbenga, if you want to help people and if you want to make money, you are a social entrepreneur. I never heard social entrepreneur as a word prior to that conversation. And 6 months after that, I won a global business plan competition. I came to America, I worked for the United Nations. I started a bunch of social enterprises, and I ultimately made a pivot into the power of business storytelling. Because what happened to me was when I got a storyteller come into my life to gift me the right language to tell my story, my life changed. And I've been helping people accomplish the same pivot and change in their careers and businesses.
Magnificent. Why storytelling? Because the thing is, when you say storytelling, I understand storytelling, but I think a lot of people will take it lightly. They won't see the gravity in storytelling. It's just like you want to tell someone, um, the boy is good. And instead of just saying the boy is good, you rather go around, the boy has gone through this thing, now he's this is who he is now. There's like something about the boy that made him good. But a lot of people wouldn't see that. And my question is, why storytelling? And how do you connect and convey the gravity of storytelling? Because from what you do, I know that they used, like when you have like a client, for example, they used to be this way, And then after bringing you in and you do what you do, they are now this. Like, how do you convey the gravity of storytelling, and why do you choose storytelling?
Well, everyone has a story to tell. And I would say your story is your superpower. If you think about it in business, every business is trying to differentiate themselves from the competitor. And your story is your ultimate differentiator. The reason is because no one else in the world has your story. If you look at it from a career standpoint, you may go for a job interview and you have the same level of education as your competition. You have the same level of technical skills as your competition. You have the same level of language skills as your competition. So when it comes to the external skill sets, um, it's pretty much you in competition with the rest of the world. But there's one specific area, is your zone of genius, is your superpowered zone, is a territory that no one else in the world can compete with you. And that is your story. But oftentimes we don't necessarily tie our personal story into our work, and we rather compete on the variables that everyone else has with us. But when we elevate our positioning strategy to start incorporating our story, we tap into superpower. Another thing I realize in storytelling is when it comes to business, your story is one of the untapped assets in your business. The reason is because at the end of the day, people do business with people. It's all about a world of relationship. It's a community economy. It's a social driven economy. And the more you tell your story, you're able to activate that community. And you're able to give people a specific reason to do business with you along a set of core values that are important to them. So let me give you an example. I do work with a couple of small business bookstores, and you're an author yourself, so you understand the gravity of this point and also the competition in the industry. The ultimate giant of the competition of bookstores is Amazon. So how do you compete with Amazon in speed, in quality, in pricing? It's impossible. But we're seeing businesses opening up multiple locations even during the pandemic because they've been able to tell a story, and the people will rather travel to them because they are connecting to them on a set of values important to them. And they will rather even pay more money to them because to them it's all about a community. And storytelling helps with that community activation. So your story is your superpower. That is why you should tell your story.
Magnificent. So, have you ever had someone? Because I think one of the major challenge is how to even tell your story, because sometimes you don't even believe your own story would sell, or sometimes you don't even think people want to hear your story or whatever. So have you ever had one of the scenario whereby someone reaches out to you and then they share their story and they don't feel like, nah, I should say this to the world, and you were able to like fine tune it and like help them work on the story and make it much more, you know, presentable to the world? Or is there a form of, you know, taking things in and, you know, putting things on the side and just, you know, making the story, like for example in Hollywood,
Mhm.
if they don't just tell the story as it is. I don't believe they tell the story as it is, because in Hollywood it's about profit. So if you're telling the story, you have to say it in a way that makes the producer or the production company some money. So it's either they exaggerate some things
I see.
and or maybe they take some things out because they know that if they tell the truth in the story, people might not like it, or it might cause some outrage or whatever. So do you at some point do the same thing to people's story, to like, what, this is your story, but you have to like be more be more exaggerative in this aspect, and this aspect don't say too much about this thing. I have like a specific example, but I'll let you answer this, and then I'll
Okay.
give you like a specific example that I have in mind.
Okay. Well, one of the common reaction I get about storytelling, say podcasts like this or at my life events, I might get a feedback, people saying, I really like what you're saying. It resonates, but I still don't believe I have an interesting story to tell. And I don't think anyone wants to listen to a story of someone like me. I am from overseas. I am from a small town. My life is not that interesting. Why should I be telling my story? Another concern about storytelling that I have is people struggle to find the right story to tell. When you say tell your story, Gbenga, I have multiple of those stories. Which one are you talking about? And the last one is people would say, I want my story to be dramatic. I want my story to be inspirational. I want my story to come with a bang. But I don't think I have that bang. Can you help me put that bang and swag in my story? Well, the first thing I would say is your responsibility is to identify your story. Professional storytellers like myself, we can help to pivot and wordsmith the story. We can help with the distribution of your story. And I think that is secondary. It's not even as more important and powerful because storytelling is a vulnerable emotional experience. A lot of us don't want to go back to those moments, especially when our stories might be negative or traumatizing, that we don't want to go back to relive those experiences. And yeah, am I saying, telling you that we should go back and embrace those stories? I think that is the hard part. But when you finally give yourself permission to go back to those moments and embrace those stories, then once you have the story identified, and then we can work on the strategy to distribute the story. Sometimes it's not about embellishing the story, exaggerating the story. It's being strategic with the language so it resonates with the audience you're telling it to. I recognize the average person is a business person, is a professional person. Storytelling is not what they do. And that is why you need coaches, you need strategists, you need brand strategists to help you with the marketing and the distribution of your story. Your responsibility is to go within yourself and document that story. I think that is a hard part.
Yeah, you're very right about the coaches. This is something that I always like kind of hammer on, that people need coaches, like paid coaches. A lot of people think they could do it by themselves, and like I could just go on YouTube and watch a video, and that's enough. That is not enough. I've done that myself. I did that for like 2-3 years, and until I started realizing I have to hire like a professional coach and pay them. Um, that is really true, honestly. And also, you said something that I'm super familiar with when you said, for example, when you said when you ask people to tell their story and they tell you what story specifically. That's something that I go through every day, especially as a filmmaker. There are like billions of stories. How do you even know which one to choose and then I'll tell that specific story? Um, and you also nailed on something that I had in mind when I said I had a specific example, that it was about a lot of people from the third world countries like Africa, Dominica, places like that. I've met a lot of people from those places, and they have such a story that it's so crazy, and they just don't want to talk about it. If tons of them just would prefer to stay quiet because they don't want to say so many things, because sometimes they might even say something that could backfire or could be used against them or something. So in some cases they choose not to tell the story, or maybe when they write a book they now like put it in their autobiography or books like that. cases like that, I think, have you come across something like that whereby it's like such an intense situation, and for example, let's say people from like illegal immigrants, for example.
Okay.
It would be very difficult for them to just come out and say, hey, I'm an illegal immigrant. Things are hard because they don't know who's who, they don't know who's watching, they don't know who's ICE, for example. So people like that would rather stay to themselves. And even in colleges, for example, when they apply for scholarship, colleges will say, put it there, write it there, that you're this, you're that, because it's the stories that they use also to get the scholarship. But I've seen a lot of people prefer not to use their stories. Sometimes they come up with an entirely different story to make maybe the situation look a bit much more connecting and emotional, but they wouldn't tell the true story. And you could tell that it's not the truth because they don't own it like they should own the story. Do you have an experience with something like that you can share with us?
No, absolutely. I go through this every single day, and I really love when you touch on ownership. I think what is a critical piece in this. By the way, I think the technical term is undocumented, not illegal immigrants. This is what led me to the equivalent of that community in America would be the inner cities, in the urban communities, low-income communities across the country. So my documentary took place in the least developed quadrant of Washington, D.C., which is Southeast and Anacostia community. It's an historic community, predominantly African-American, low income, has the highest of crime rates, violence, and least in opportunity in the nation's capital. There is a tendency to allow that narrative to define you and not consciously pivot that narrative. So that led me to the community to work with 7 entrepreneurs. And those entrepreneurs are points of light in their community. They are business owners. They are changing their narrative where people see scarcity, they see opportunity. And they're using that to turn around the narrative of that community. And because they're able to embrace their story and understand that their community does not define them, they are the one that defined their own identity. That led to the documentary Good to Great Stories on Amazon Prime. Furthermore, I would say a story is a universal language. Regardless of your culture, regardless of your language, the power of storytelling is this. Once you identify your story can be wrapped up in a theme. There is a theme of love. There is a theme of power. There's a theme of failure. There's a theme of health. There's a theme of family. Those are universal. While your own personal experience might be something personal to you, might be something that happened in a foreign community or a local community or a different community, the ultimate theme that your story represents is universal. And the moment you start espousing those themes, that resonates with people. In any country of the world, people can relate with family as a theme, with spirituality as a theme, with success as a theme. That is the genius of storytelling. And one quick example I also want to give is one of my clients. She comes from West Africa, a small island called Cape Verde. Think about Cape Verde as Cuba or, very artistic, very, think about it as the Latin American countries, a lot of soul, a lot of vibes. And our ancestors immigrated to America in the 1800s. There's a long-standing treaty between the country of Cape Verde and the city of Boston. They stretched multiple centuries. And a lot of people came into the New England area from Cape Verde back in the day. A family was one of those. When they came here, the thing they could do as a survival mechanism was sewing and fashion. They don't call it fashion, they call it sewing. So if you think about those small businesses that would do garment alteration, if you want to fix your garment, that was what they did to survive. She was born American, and she did everything to distance herself for that immigrant stigma. And because of that, she intentionally went to university to pursue psychology. She didn't want to do anything with lifestyle, with fashion. But everywhere she go, some people are just naturally gifted when it comes to style. Even their presence tell a story. Their choice of, fashion tell a story. And she would get all of that compliment. And at some point, she was in this conflict of her professional life and her purpose and her brand identity. So she left Boston and she traveled, took a leap of faith to Washington, D.C. When she came, I was recommended to her as a brand coach, and she sought my services. And in our very first question session, I told her to tell me about her family story. And she had a visceral reaction. She said she was emotional, and we had to stop the session. And a few hours later, she texted me. She said, Gbenga, I know what it is. And she texted the word, the fashion psychologist. I thought that was interesting. Tell me more about this. She said, Gbenga, I have decided to embrace my profession and to embrace my calling to create this brand called the fashion psychology. We created a brand statement, which is helping women embrace the power of their mind and their wardrobe to actualize the outcomes they seek out of life. She's gone on to be a consultant for Nike. She's gone on to do events across the country. She's a well sought after speaker, and she's very successful. And she created this brand called the Fashion Psychologist. Now, if you look at what she all her life ran away from, our family identity, our immigrant story, was what was responsible to shape this global brand that she was able to create. So, my message to people from emerging communities and countries who are running away from what made them unique and separated, unique from the rest of the world, and separate them in terms of their power and their superpower, is to give themselves permission to embrace it. It is not your responsibility to project or to imagine how your story would resonate. No, that is your audience responsibility. Your responsibility is to tell your truth. Lastly, I'm going to make it brief. We talk about undocumented immigrant. My story is public. When I came into the United States at the Atlanta International Airport and I was facing deportation, I told my truth. I told them that I was coming to the United States as a business. And it's a red flag. You don't say that when you're visiting the country. You keep your mouth shut, you do your business, and you get out. I said, no, I am coming to America to create businesses. And they put me for secondary screening, and I was facing deportation. And I was pressed for multiple interviews. And I said, that was my truth. They did the investigation and got back to me and said, Gbenga, we want you to become a permanent resident. And this is how you go about becoming a permanent resident. I put in my application for the extraordinary ability in business. And I became a thought leader, recognized leader in my field because I was vulnerable enough to tell my truth. And that became my superpower.
It's a very powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. And I understand when you said they pulled you over and that's the normal thing was to keep quiet. And that's why a lot of people just prefer to keep quiet sometimes. But then because people don't know how to go about how to say, the saying that it's not what you say, it's how you say it, but I think there's so much gem to pick up from everything you just said. It's so powerful, so magnificent. One of my favorite quotes that I've heard from Danlock is facts tell, story sells. What does that mean to you? Facts
Well,
tell, story sells.
What that means to me is that people do not buy what you sell; they buy the stories that you tell. And I think when it comes to facts, we would call it storytelling is a new marketing. When you look at the old school traditional marketing, they talk about the product features. So let's take Nike for an example. Old school Nike commercial would tell you the tennis or the shoe itself. Um, and they tell you the durability, the elasticity of the shoe. They tell you the quality was made of, the design, all of the features of the shoe, and the products and the athletic gears that they're trying to market. But the new school marketing, they tell you a story. They showed you Serena Williams. They showed you Colonel Kaepernick. They showed you a person in the community that has defied the odds, that has reinvented himself. And they tell you this idea that everyone has this superhuman athletic ability that is not what is reserved for those in the athletic field. It is reachable with every single one of us. So one was emphasizing the facts, but one is emphasizing the stories of the benefit and wrapping a narrative around that story. So when it comes to you getting capital for your business, you can work an investor through your profit and loss, your balance sheet. You can work an investor through your technology, your proprietary solution. You can work an investor through, your inventory and your raw materials and your production processes. All of those are facts and they're important. But when it comes to unlocking the emotional factor, and we see that happen at Shark Tank all the time, when the entrepreneurs come and say, I started this business, because I promised my wife that I was going to be the breadwinner of the house. I started this business when my mom died, and I said I was going to step up to be the breadwinner of the family. I started this business because I couldn't see anything in my community that solves the solution. And I went through this, and that story resonates with the entrepreneur because the magic of story is ultimately people listen to your story with the filter of their own story. It reminds them of themselves, and that is how you unlock the emotional connection. And at the end of the day, it's the emotion that you want to open up, and that storytelling does that. Facts, yeah, it provides the credibility, but when it comes to decision making, though, that it has to be an emotional factor. People have to feel something. People have to relate with what you're doing. I call it points of commonality. People have to feel something in common with you to be able to identify with you, and storytelling helps to do that.
You said something very significant, that people listen to your own story using the filter of their own story. So all the while they're listening to your story, they're thinking about their own story, looking for that commonality. And the moment they find that, it's almost like you've penetrated something that facts will never do.
Absolutely.
Magical. That's magical. So what's the thing that made you go from conveying your message using a book to now using film? What's the thing that made you go from that? Is it that visuals are much more, relatable? Or I'd just like to understand what made you go into filmmaking.
Well, they say that a photo speaks 1,000 words, and I had insert a video speak 1,000,000 words.
Find each and every little small success that you can get and build on it.
We could have a shift in our community if we had better options in our community.
I was working in retail, but I wasn't connected to what I was seeing around me.
Position yourself so that when the door opens, you'll be able to walk through that door.
Hi, I'm Gbenga Ogunjimi, and my superpower is business storytelling. I use this superpower to help thought leaders and businesses tell and monetize their stories. Over the past few months, I've had a distinct honor of working with this Washington, D.C. entrepreneurs you're about to meet. All these businesses were already good, but together we went on a journey from good to great by embracing the power of their stories. Welcome to Good to Great Stories, a small business documentary.
And
Facts.
what made me make the ultimate pivot, honestly, I'll tell you, I am an accidental filmmaker. I didn't set out to become a filmmaker. Um, and I think it was an opportunity. I was in the community of Anacostia in Washington, D.C., and I was doing business coaching. Obviously, I specialize in storytelling. And the more I work with these entrepreneurs, I said, wow, look at these stories. The world needs to hear these stories. And I made a pitch to our investor then, which was JP Morgan. And I said, we got to tell the stories. And they said yes. And that ultimately led to me producing my first documentary. Also, in my career journey, I always want to ask myself, who am I becoming? Before I wrote my book, I was just doing coaching and I became an author. And afterward, I thought, what is the platform I can utilize to amplify my voice and deepen my impact in my community? And when I started to work with this community, I thought this was a wonderful opportunity. And I gave myself permission to pivot again. And I think that is a valuable skill in 21st century, ability to reinvent oneself and ability to pivot. I would say that businesses do not die because of lack of money, because of lack of customers, because of lack of opportunities. They die because they fail to pivot. And I think for me, that was the opportunity to pivot my personal brand to become a filmmaker. It's a wonderful experience. It's a wonderful ride. It's amazing to see stories come to life in a different format. It's still a learning experience for me. I'm still learning and doing at the same time. But I would say, honestly, I'm an accidental filmmaker. It just happened to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The thing is, a bunch of top filmmakers in Hollywood today used to be accidental filmmaker. Everyone started with like a small point and shoot camera, and now they're like big. So, you just got to start from somewhere. And saying what you put together, being an accidental filmmaker, that'll be very hard to believe.
Thank you very much.
That'll be very difficult to believe, but it's just so interesting. So what was it like for you? Did you have like those people that you were going to interview in mind, or it just kept evolving organically as time goes on? You're like, okay, like what was the process in selecting those that you had in your documentary, in your Go to Great documentary?
Well, for me, I was blessed because I already have the right foundation for this type of work, which was storytelling. So the people I was working with, we've gone through an extensive coaching process of them being able to tell their story. We didn't even know it was going to be filmed. I was just preparing them to find a story, to craft the story, to tell the story. So we were already doing that before the opportunity of filmmaking happened. So when the opportunity of filmmaking happened, you thought they were all professional film, people. You thought they were like professional actors or whatever. But the reason is because there was extensive coaching and training, them being able to tell their story. So that process was a very organic one that just kind of went through. I was able to build a team, like a production team with me. I hired a local production company, and they were able to provide a lot of expertise. And I utilized my experience with the coaching and directing to provide a vision, for how the storyline would evolve and how the production would go. The technical component of it was a local film production that was able to help with that. As I said, it was a lot of learning, a lot of roles we had. We didn't even know the title for the role. We just knew that this has to be done and someone has to do it. And I think that is the magic of doers, of entrepreneurs, is they don't allow what they don't know hold them back. And, they say ignorance is a bliss, it's a blessing. Sometimes when you know too much, it might actually prevent you from doing. But sometimes if you don't know enough, you might make a mistake and people might see that as an innovation and say, oh, that is creative, but you were just trying to do it. So, but you are absolutely right. A lot of people saw that and would not believe that that was my first production and that was even accidental. They said, what? And I'm getting this from professional, those who have like years of experience in the game. It's just a blessing. And also for me, it speaks to operating in your zone of genius. When you are operating in purpose, in your personal brand, things like that, you may call it accidental, but you've been doing it all along. You're not just doing it in that particular format, but if you peel back the onions, you would see this is who you are. Yeah.
In the business of, I don't want to call it a business, but in storytelling, who has had the biggest influence on you when it comes to storytelling and crafting yourself in this world of storytelling?
Well, let me start with business storytelling. My number one storyteller, businessman and entrepreneur and business leader is Howard Schultz, is the co-founder of Starbucks. And this is a person that took coffee and made it this phenomenal brand, one of the biggest brands in the world. And he did that. For me, that is ultimate storytelling, or brand storytelling. And it redefined what the culture experience, what the coffee culture experiences around the world. So I would say that is one. I would say like what really sparked my interest in storytelling was a TED Talk by Chimamanda, The Danger of a Single Story. I remember I was in Nigeria and I just stumbled on this platform called TED. And so there are Nigerians also on this platform. So let me check out the Nigerians on the platform. And I'm telling you, this woman came on the platform and our presence, our mastery, our Nigerianness, she was a queen. And I was in that moment, I was like, whatever this woman is doing, I am going to do the same. So I think that was magical. Another icon I look up to is Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry was also someone you might consider an accidental filmmaker because he was self-taught, but he was not able to acquire the skills, but just the visionary leadership of turning his local community, to an emerging film capital of the world. I think that also was, one of my icons. So I'll point to those three. So I'm going to point to Howard Schultz, Chimamanda, and Tyler Perry.
When it comes to your book, Waterless Voice, I'm pretty sure a lot of people have gone through the book. And that's me inclusive. Is there something that whenever someone has gone through the book and they approach and they tell you, oh, I've gone through your book and this is what I got from the book, is there something that you wish they had gotten from the book but they didn't get, that's like an hidden gem somewhere in the book and they just haven't tapped into that? And that is because one thing I understand is creators, people, writers like you want people to get some specific form of message, a deep message, and that is why you put it down in the book. But it's almost like some people still don't get it. So when someone tells you that they've gone through your book, is there something that is key in the book that you want them to still get, but you feel like they still haven't gotten it?
Well, I think the book did an incredible job on making a powerful case how your story is your superpower. And it showed you with multiple examples how people who at one point didn't embrace their story and went through that vulnerable journey or process of embracing it, and you saw the transformation that happened to them as a result of that. And I think me, particularly as the author, being vulnerable and telling my own immigrant story at the beginning of the chapter, and people can tell when you're vulnerable, when you're honest, when you're authentic. And I think the authenticity just speaks to people so deeply. And I've received a lot of letters all the way from Australia and the United Kingdom. As you know, I'm doing a whole lot of work in the Latino communities now. Even folks in the Latino community saying, I relate, I resonate with this message. Yes, I have a story to tell. And your book makes me see it, that I have a story to tell. So I haven't had a lot of cases where I wish people would get something they're not getting. My only goal for the book is what the subtitle says, the power of telling your story and defining your identity. And I think I've been able to accomplish that. I've been so much blessed. It's a very easy read. I intentionally didn't make it a huge, voluminous book. I take it straight to the impact. Cut it to the chase. So it's a very practical tool for anyone considering storytelling. So I think the book kind of makes this case that if you are someone who is struggling with, my story is not important. If you're someone who's struggling with, I don't know what story to tell. If you're someone who is thinking about, I want my story to be dramatic, I think you read the book and you realize that my story is enough. I don't have to be someone else's story. My story is all I need. And I believe that book accomplished that. If there's only downside I can say to the book, I would say because my personal story is an immigrant story, and it's such a riveting, emotional, powerful story, it kind of gives the book like a minority, immigrant, Black type of book. I don't mind that. I'm honored for that, but it's more than that. So we kind of categorize the book as kind of a Black voice, book for minority, book for immigrant stories. But there are multiple stories in the book.
Yeah.
There is this book, stories on spiritual, the pastor, the spiritual coach. There's a book of the story of the impact investor. There's a story of the creative entrepreneur. There's a story of the fashion psychologist. There are even case studies of brands telling this story. It's not just categorized to one bucket. So I would say that.
Your film, Good to Great Stories, are you going to be doing a sequel to it?
Yes, I will be doing a sequel to the Good to Great Stories. There's a lot of opportunities on the table. It's hard to tell if it's going to be a direct sequel to that story, but definitely that would not be my final production. So there's a whole lot of opportunities. The intended vision after the production was to replicate the model in other communities across the country, particularly urban community that may not have been on the spotlight that I remember, I think my film is the only story of that community in Washington, D.C. on such a platform. But how many of those communities across the country? So when you hear of Harlem, there's a whole ton of stories about Harlem since the beginning of time. But there are several Black communities across the country that we don't always hear that story. Um, Another point that is aspirational for me, just kind of use this platform to kind of break the news. Not so much of breaking the news, but to declare my intention is I would love to produce a story about the connection between Africans and American, particularly first generation African immigrants in the United States. As you know, I'm married into the culture, and I see how our cultures is just so beautifully interwoven, but not a lot of the stories are being told. Let me give you one. So in West Africa, we have this jollof wars happening, Nigerian jollof, all of that. But did you know that in the South, there is red rice, which is parallel to the jollof that we have in West Africa? Nobody knows that story. So imagine this distinction or comparison with Nigerian jollof and South
Red rice.
America in the South, red rice. Look at that combination. So, and there's several stories like that we don't know that I really would like to bring to life. Lastly, when you look at the cultural practices, in America, there's a concept of baby shower. In Nigeria, we have the concept of naming ceremonies. And I think there's so many things we can teach each other. And I thought both are beautiful. When you meet an African person, they tell you the meaning of their names. I think there's a cultures that we can export here too. And there's so many resiliency in the African American story that can actually help us with the state of our politics in many African countries. So I think we have to crisscross, those wisdom, cultural practice, and experiences. We have to do it in storytelling. So that's my next task in story production.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. What's your regular day life? And what do you do for fun to relax?
Good question. With the Zoom work economy that we're in right now, so I think everyone is kind of finding their balance with what that means to them. Outside of you just rolling back to your computer and rolling out of your Zoom off and on.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say for me, it's still a work in progress, to be honest with you. I have to show up for my meetings, and afterwards, I just try to find out some form of balance to it. Sometimes I overdo it. Sometimes you're tired, you underdo it. Sometimes, things like that. But what I've incorporated that I've been doing both for balance and for fun is I have started to do long walks. Like just, sometimes you just get tired of the gym. I just want to experience nature. I just want to walk. And one thing I've been doing is leaving my phone at home when I go for my walks and just allow myself to be creative. So when I have a burning question I'm finding answers to, I schedule it for my walk session. I say, you know what, I'm going to come back with an answer when I go for this walk. And I see that when I come back with new ideas. So, and I've been getting so much entrenched in it that it's hot, it's raining, it's snow, I'm outside walking. So that's what I've been doing a whole lot lately.
All right, guys, you heard that. Long walks without your cell phone, because we're living the cell phone generation.
Yes.
All right, if we want to reach you, how do we reach you?
My website is gbenga.org. Gbenga is Gbenga. It has my social media handles on my website. I am on Instagram at Gbenga_I am. I'm also on Facebook I am Gbenga on Facebook. But once you get to my website, gbenga.org, you'll find all my information. I also would highly recommend that you get my book on Amazon, Waterless Voice, The Power of Telling Your Story and Define Your Identity. And rather than Amazon, you're also going to get my documentary, which is Good to Great Stories, a small business documentary.
There'll be a link below to both the book and the video for everyone interested. This is finally coming to an end. Do you have any parting words for us? A favorite quote?
Well, what I just want to do is to challenge everyone to tell their story. And how do you do that? You do that by documenting your defining moments. When I ask you, like, what is one day in your life you will never forget? You know what that day is. That is a good step to start to tell your story. Even if all you do is to document it and to write it out with the highest level of specificity that you can and details that you can, what is going to happen is there'll be clarity, there'll be a new perspective, and it'll be a higher appreciation of that particular event. If that is all that you do, you're successful. And when the time has come, you find a coach, you find a strategist, you can give them a document and say, this is my story. That can become a book, that can become a documentary, that can become a business, that can become a 501c3, that can become a coaching program, that can become a digital content, that can become, a marketing message, that can become an endorsement strategy. Your story is your wealth. But if you don't try to document that story, you're not able to create wealth that you've been given by God. So tell your story.
Thank you so much for that. Guys, you've heard that. Tell your story and remember to always be your best self. And if you enjoy content like this, make sure you click the like button, make sure you click the subscribe button, and share this video for everyone in your family, for every of your friends to see. Let's not be selfish with valuable contents like this. So remember, guys, tell your story. Thank you so much, Gbenga.